Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Triple N Media Cardiology Lectures. I am Dr. Nick Nickham. In this presentation, we are going to look at ACLS EKG interpretations and management. So let us begin. Here are some of the fundamental things that we need to look for when we are analyzing an electrocardiogram or a rhythm strip. First, we need to determine the rate, the rhythm, the P waves, QRS complexes, T waves, ST segment deviations, and any presence of myocardial infarction. We need to pay attention to the RR intervals. Are the RR intervals regular? Are they irregular? Are they irregularly irregular? Next, we need to look at the R to R relationship. Atrial activity. Just like the RR intervals, we need to look at the atrial activity. Are the P waves clearly visible? Is the P cycle constant? Is there a constant relationship between the P and the QRS in each cycle? Then we look at the QRS complexes, which reflects the ventricular activity. Is there a relationship between the QRS complex and the P waves? What is the morphology of the QRS complex, which may help us to identify the source of an arrhythmia? Similarly, we look for STT changes, which may suggest ischemia, subendocardial ischemia, or myocardial infarction, and a few other conditions like strain or cerebrovascular accidents, etc. Let us begin with some EKG strips. Now, take a moment, come up with your interpretation based on all the factors that I talked to you about, looking at the PP intervals and the cycles, looking at the RR intervals and looking at the rate. First, look at the ventricular rate, then look at the atrial rate, look at the relationship between the P and the QRS complexes, look at the STT waves, and then come up with your diagnosis. Of course, this is a normal sinus rhythm at a rate which is approximately 75 per minute with a regular PR interval, narrow QRS complex, and normal STT segments. What is your diagnosis and what is the management plan? We can pause here for a second and take a look at it, and when you're ready, let us proceed. Let's pay attention to the PR interval. This is short, this is longer, this is longest, followed by there is a dropped P wave here. So this is a form of Wenckebach. Actually, we are missing a P wave here, but nonetheless, there is progressive prolongation of the PR interval. Unless the P is sort of buried in the QRS complex, which means we have to measure this, but the interval is too early here. So this is a Wenckebach, and look at the RR intervals. They are getting shorter. And in addition to that, the PR interval, which was the longest one before there was a dropped QRS complex, here there's a dropped P also, the PR interval returns to normal. So this is an example of a Wenckebach. Wenckebach is something we see in patients with inferior myocardial infarction and sometimes with various types of metabolic abnormalities. And generally, it doesn't need any specific treatment other than treating the underlying circumstances. And here is an example of a significant bradycardia. The rate is something like between 30 to 35 beats per minute. The PR intervals are constant, but there's a slight change in morphology. But in monitor strips, it is hard to say it is hard to determine the morphology because of change in positions, patient's position, etc. Okay, this is a bradycardia. So the treatment of bradycardia depends upon whether the patient has symptoms or not. If this were a symptomatic bradycardia, it can be treated with atropine 0.5 milligrams bolus up to repeated up to 3 milligrams of total atropine. If the patient is hypotensive, they can also be started on dopamine infusion, which not only supports the blood pressure but may also increase the heart rate. But if they are asymptomatic, we just need to follow them. There are a lot of people who are walking around with the heart rate in the low 40s or high 30s, and they are generally asymptomatic. Here is another example of a severe bradycardia. The PR intervals are constant. There is some ST depression here and a biphasic T wave. So this suggests we are dealing with a severe bradycardia with some possible ischemic changes noted in the ST-T segments. When we see this type of bradycardia, the question is this patient symptomatic? If this patient is symptomatic with weakness, fatigue, dizziness, or syncope, then not only do you acutely treat it with atropine, for long term, this patient may end up needing a pacemaker unless this was related to an ischemic coronary event, which may resolve with the resolution of coronary ischemia. Now here is an example of a narrow QRS tachycardia, which is approximately about 120 per minute. There's a regular P cycle here. We have a regular QRS cycle. There's a good relationship between the P and the QRS complex. So we are dealing with sinus tachycardia. Whenever we see a patient with sinus tachycardia, we always need to look for underlying cause. Sinus tachycardia is pathological. It is not just a benign condition. Actually, sinus tachycardia signals something is going on underneath the hood, and we need to go and check the engine. We need to look for fever, hypoxia, dehydration, bleeding, or worsening heart failure. All of these can increase the heart rate, increase the myocardial oxygen demand, and thus increase sinus rate. And when you see sinus tachycardia, you make sure that you examine the patient, get the appropriate tests, and correct the underlying causes. Okay, here is an example of a rapid narrow QRS tachycardia. First of all, it is regular. You can take my word, this is approximately 165 beats per minute, and we do not see clear-cut P waves. There's a T wave here, and it's possible there may be a P wave buried in the T waves. The rate is 165, which puts this in the category of paroxysmal atrial tachycardia. It could also be atrial flutter with 2-to-1 conduction. We don't know because we don't see clear P waves. It could also be atrial fibrillation with rapid ventricular response, but the rhythm is pretty regular, so it is unlikely to be atrial fibrillation with rapid ventricular response. Another condition that can cause narrow QRS tachycardia would be multifocal atrial tachycardia, where we see varying morphology of the P waves, but here we don't even see the P waves. And number two, this rhythm is very regular for it to be multifocal atrial tachycardia. Most likely we are dealing with a paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia, or PSVT as it is called, and the management of these patients, it would include adenosine 6 milligrams intravenous bolus followed by a flush, and then if that doesn't work, you give another 12 milligrams IV bolus with a total dose of 18 milligrams altogether. And I was talking about atrial flutter with 2-to-1 conduction, and the best way to see if this is atrial flutter with 2-to-1 conduction would be to try some vagal maneuvers like straining or doing a carotid sinus pressure, and if we can slow the ventricular rate, the flutter waves may become apparent if we are dealing with a flutter. So if the patient doesn't respond to adenosine, we need to look for other ways to find out if this is actually paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia or if we are dealing with an atrial flutter with 2-to-1 conduction. Pause here for a second and let us see what is your diagnosis. First of all, pick up the obvious ones. Then look for the missing components. Afterwards, put all the pieces together. First of all, we have a narrow QRS tachycardia at a rate of 125 per minute. We don't see clear P waves preceding the QRS complex, but there is a little notch here in the ST segment which may suggest a retrograde P wave. If that is the case, we may be dealing with a junctional tachycardia with a retrograde P wave. Junctional tachycardia is not very common. It can also be a reentrant tachycardia involving the AB node where we see a retrograde P wave, in which case it is called AB nodal reentry tachycardia, AVNRT. And if we see junctional tachycardia, then we should think about digitalis toxicity. Junctional tachycardia may be seen in patients with inferior myocardial infarction, and it is usually related to ischemia. And once the infarction settles, the rhythm usually disappears. The actual treatment for this rhythm is the treatment for the underlying myocardial ischemia. So we look for ischemia, fever, hypoxia, same thing, bleeding, heart failure, and correct those underlying conditions. Pause here for a second and come up with your diagnosis, then we will proceed. Here we have a sinus beat, sinus beat, sinus beat. Then we have an early beat, because if you look at the PP interval, this is the PP interval and this is coming in early. So this is a premature and we see a P wave. So this is a premature atrial complex or beat. So this is an isolated atrial premature beat. Should you be concerned about isolated premature atrial beats? Perhaps you should be concerned about premature atrial beats, because the presence of frequent atrial premature beats may suggest an increased stretching or strain on the left atrium, which may later on lead to atrial flutter or fibrillation. So if we are dealing with for example, a patient in the postoperative ward with frequent PACs, I would look for all the correctable causes like electrolyte imbalances, metabolic changes, so that we minimize the risk of patient going into atrial fibrillation at a later time. And if you are seeing these PACs frequently following cardiac surgery, the chances are very high they could go into atrial fibrillation, and hence I used to put these patients on beta blockers. I'm talking about patients who had just returned from cardiac surgery who were showing frequent PACs. So PACs may look benign, but they can become potentially challenging. Here's an example of a normal beat, an ectopic beat coming in early, premature, supraventricular, most likely a PAC, because we see a little notch on the T waves here, which may suggest a premature atrial complex. So we have a atrial bigeminy, and when we see these kinds of ectopic beats, we need to be concerned not necessarily about what we are seeing now, but what could transpire in the hours or days to come by, which is they could develop atrial flutter or fibrillation. All right, talking about arrhythmias, and here what is your diagnosis? Okay, we are dealing with atrial flutter with 4:1 conduction. The atrial rate is approximately 300 and the ventricular rate is approximately 75. And if we were to see this person in the emergency room, the ventricular rate is not a major concern, but the presence of atrial flutter, especially if this is new onset, will be of concern, because these patients have a tendency to develop blood clots, and hence they need to be on blood thinner while they are being worked up and evaluated for any evidence of ischemic heart disease. When we see atrial flutter, these patients need to be treated with blood thinners to prevent any blood clots causing stroke, while at the same time looking for what precipitated the arrhythmia. Let's say you're having a atrial flutter with 2-to-1 conduction. You cannot see where the P waves are. If that is the situation, we can try some vagal maneuvers to slow the AV conduction and thus unravel some of these P waves, or we can try carotid sinus pressure to slow the rate so that we can see the flutter waves. If we see the flutter waves, then we know we are dealing with atrial flutter with rapid ventricular response with 2-to-1 conduction. Then these patients need to be on anticoagulants from the beginning. If this is a new onset atrial flutter, these patients can undergo cardioversion after they had a transesophageal echocardiography to rule out any evidence of left atrial thrombus. You can pause here for a second and come up with your diagnosis and management. We are dealing with atrial fibrillation with fairly rapid ventricular response. The best way to measure the response is these are 1 second markers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In 6 seconds, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this rate is approximately 90. If it's over 100, then it will be atrial fibrillation with a rapid ventricular response. Atrial fibrillation with a rapid ventricular response could be either paroxysmal or it could be persistent long-term atrial fibrillation. If the patients have long-term persistent atrial fibrillation with a rapid ventricular response, they have a tendency to develop tachycardia-related heart failure, and hence it is exceedingly important to reduce their heart rate to below 80, and it can be accomplished with drugs. Their treatment for atrial fibrillation will be controlling the ventricular response. That's number one. Number two, if this patient is not on anticoagulation, then we need to consider using anticoagulation for prevention of stroke. There are various kinds of drugs that are available to control the rate. If the rate is like 180, then we can use IV diltiazem with a 10 to 15 milligram bolus, followed by a drip at 10 to 15 milligrams per hour. At the same time, we can start these patients on beta blockers, hoping they can tolerate beta blockers intravenously or orally. If the rate is still not controlled on beta blockers, we can use digoxin by using 0.5 milligrams digoxin IV and 0.25 milligram of digoxin 6 hours later, and a third dose of 0.25 milligrams 6 hours after the second dose. Once these patients are digitalized, they are maintained on digoxin based upon their renal function. IV verapamil can also be used similar to the beta blocker use. The advantage of verapamil is that it can be used in patients with chronic lung disease. We're going to take a little break here and switch gears. And what is your diagnosis? Again, as I said, we need to look at the RR cycle. We need to look at the P wave. We need to look at the QRS complex morphology. We need to look at the ST segment deviations. We need to look for T wave changes. So what do we see here? Well, actually, there's no trick in this electrocardiogram. This is a sinus rhythm EKG with the right bundle branch block. You see the typical RSR prime with changes related to repolarization abnormalities from the bundle branch block. We are seeing changes in the QRS morphology. We also see changes in the STT segments, which are a normal accompaniment of a bundle branch block, be it right or the left. Right bundle branch block can be diagnosed by just looking at lead 1. If you look at lead 1, you're going to see this slurred S wave, and when you see the slurred S wave, it's not like a sharp down and up. It is like a rounded, slurred S wave. We know we are dealing with the right bundle branch block. Okay, pause here for a second. Take a look at this electrocardiogram. Tell me where you're finding abnormalities and what you're going to do about those. Okay, here we have an increase in voltage. Evidence for left ventricular hypertrophy with STT segments suggestive of strain in the lateral leads. So when we see left ventricular hypertrophy with strain in the lateral chest leads, it is not uncommon to see ST segment elevation in the anterior leads. Sometimes it can be quite prominent and it can mimic anterior myocardial infarction. If this patient were to come to the emergency room with chest pain and these ST elevations, it would be very hard to differentiate this one from a patient with just left ventricular hypertrophy. On the other hand, if this patient had an electrocardiogram like a month ago or 2 months ago and the EKG looked exactly like this, then chances are that chest pain may not be causing these ST elevations, which are a normal variation of a patient with left ventricular hypertrophy and strain. So I wanted to keep certain things in mind because not everything is abnormal. Sometimes they are related to the underlying changes in the cardiovascular system, like left ventricular hypertrophy or left atrial enlargement or left ventricular dilatation. Okay, pause here for a second, take a look at this electrocardiogram and see what you can come up with. Okay, first of all, we have a very slow rate. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's about 60 and it's like 55. The rate is 57. So the rate is slow. We got bradycardia. In addition to that, we also have a first degree AV block with 5 plus 4, 9. That's 360 milliseconds PR interval. So we have a first degree AV block and we also have bradycardia. If these patients become bradycardic and they are symptomatic, then it needs attention. Now here's an electrocardiogram which you can pause and come up with your diagnosis. We have 4 beats of normal looking QRS, PQRS complexes. Then we have 2 beats which look like they are wide QRS complex with a retrograde P wave. This is an example of premature ventricular beats. When we see frequent premature ventricular beats, we need to be concerned about that because we need to look for any evidences of changes in serum potassium level, magnesium level, oxygen level, any evidence of myocardial ischemia, and we need to take care of those metabolic abnormalities. So these PVCs don't degenerate into runs of ventricular tachycardia. Okay, pause this for a second and come up with your diagnosis. Okay, we have a normal beat here. We have a P wave with a dropped QRS complex. We have a normal beat. Then we have a P wave with dropped QRS complex and we have a normal P wave. If you look at the PR intervals, they appear to be constant. The QRS morphology is the same. Then we have every other beat that is dropped. Since we do not have a long cycle of progressively increasing PR intervals and decreasing RR intervals, it is very hard to pinpoint this as whether this is Mobitz type 1 or Mobitz type 2 heart block. So there's a question. The only way is to look for much longer rhythm strips and see if there's some areas where you can identify something more than Mobitz type 1 or Wenckebach. Now here we have a regular sinus beat, regular sinus beat. Now we have a regular looking P waves and the QRS complex dropped. Then we have a regular P wave which looks exactly like the other one in morphology and in PR interval. Again, the question comes up, are we dealing with Mobitz type 1 or Mobitz type 2? Actually, this is an example of a P wave which is coming right on the PP cycle, but the QRS complex is dropped. Pause this for a moment, come up with your diagnosis, then we will proceed. Okay, here we have a very slow heart rate, 32 to 34 beats per minute. The QRS complexes are pretty wide, which suggests we are dealing with an idioventricular rhythm. And here we have the P waves which are marching along without being bothered by the QRS complex. And this is an example of a complete heart block. In addition to that, this patient also has a significant intraventricular conduction delay. The treatment for complete heart block is, of course, transcutaneous or transvenous pacemaker. Atropine can be used, but if you have a total AV block, the atropine may not help because the AV block cannot be reversed with atropine. If these patients are hypotensive, they can be started on dopamine, which may help with the blood pressure, and sometimes it may also help with the rate. All right, pause this for a second. Take a look at what we are seeing. Look at the P waves carefully. Look at the QRS complexes. Look at their intervals and see what is your diagnosis. Okay, we are looking at a rhythm which looks kind of weird to start with. There's a more or less a constant narrow QRS complex, which could be like junction. These beats look pretty good, except this may be a little deformed. Number two, we have P waves which are marching along independently. We are not sure these P waves, any one of them, are conducted. We have a narrow QRS ventricular rhythm which is more or less functioning independently of the PP cycle. However, this QRS morphology looks sort of weird. We are not sure if this P wave got through to activate the ventricle from above. In other words, we, for all practical purposes, would have had a complete heart block if all the QRS complexes looked alike and there was no evidence of any beats coming from the atria, or what is called the fusion beats. Since this morphology of this QRS complex is slightly different from those of the other beats, we need to think about high-grade AV block. There may be much simpler examples of a high-grade AV block, but since we are following these principles of looking at each one of these elements to put them together to create the elephant, so now we can come up with the diagnosis that we are dealing with a high-grade AV block. I mean, high-grade AV block simply means it is one step closer to the complete heart block. So they should be treated like that because we don't know when these patients are going to go into complete heart block. This should be, watched very closely. You try to increase the heart rate with drugs. You try to support their blood pressure with dopamine if needed. And if those things don't work, of course, they may need transcutaneous or transvenous pacemaker. Pause here for a second, see what you are looking at, and tell us what your diagnosis is, and we will continue. We are looking at a wide QRS complex. We have seen two P waves, which is also showing evidence of bradycardia, and we don't see the third P wave. The third P wave may be here, and the fourth P wave perhaps may be here, because if you look at this upstroke, it's different from this one and this one. So we have P waves beating independently of the ventricles. So we have a broad QRS idioventricular rhythm which is independent of the atrial activity. So we are dealing with a complete heart block with very wide QRS rhythm. The treatment for this would be, of course, a pacemaker, and if they are hypotensive, we can support them with dopamine. All right, what is your diagnosis? First of all, we have a wide QRS tachycardia. So this is not a supraventricular tachycardia. The next thing, we look for any P waves or AV dissociation or fusion beats, which might help us to pinpoint our diagnosis of this tachycardia. We don't see clear P waves anywhere here. We don't see any distortion of the various segments of the QRS complexes. So we have a wide QRS tachycardia, which for practical purposes is ventricular tachycardia. When we have a patient with a stable ventricular tachycardia who is talking, who has got adequate blood pressure, these patients can be subjected to synchronized cardioversion to get them out of the ventricular tachycardia. And for long term, we may have to maintain them on antiarrhythmic drugs such as amiodarone, sotalol, or dofetilide to avoid the recurrence of these ventricular arrhythmias, which can deteriorate into ventricular fibrillation or torsade. Here is another example of a wide QRS tachycardia, which is a representative of a ventricular tachycardia, and the treatment is, of course, if the patient is sitting and talking, maybe a cardioversion, or we may have to just shock this patient. If this VT is unstable, then start them on antiarrhythmic drugs at the same time. Same thing we talked about. If the patient is unstable, we shock this patient, start the CPR for 2 minutes, get an IV access, give epinephrine 1 milligram IV every 3 to 5 minutes, establish an airway, start capnography, and of course an antiarrhythmic drug to prevent the recurrence of ventricular tachycardia. All right, let's keep going. What is your diagnosis and what is your treatment? This is classic of torsade, where there is a shift in the electrical axis of this ventricular tachycardia with wide QRS complexes, changing the direction. And this is torsade. The treatment for this is shock and also IV magnesium. Minimum of 1 to 2 grams of IV magnesium. Immaterial what the magnesium level is. You give them magnesium, shock, and try to get this patient off the torsade and start this patient on amiodarone IV as a drug to prevent the recurrence of this torsade. Okay, what are we dealing here? This is a case of ventricular fibrillation. Of course, the treatment is shock, CPR, IV access, epinephrine, airway, capnography, and antiarrhythmic drugs. Amiodarone doesn't help. We can try lidocaine and magnesium and continue the CPR. Here's an example of a coarse ventricular fibrillation, and the treatment is, of course, the same thing as we said. Treatment is the same as we discussed before. Unstable, it should be shock, not cardioversion, then ACLS. Of course, start them on antiarrhythmic drugs. This is what is called as agonal rhythm, where we see an occasional blip of the QRS complex with a sustained flat line, and this is just a matter of time before the electrical activity ceases in this particular heart. The treatment is, of course, we can shock these patients, give epinephrine, or use a pacemaker to see if we can activate the ventricles. If we cannot, then maybe it's time to call off the cardiopulmonary resuscitation. All right, here's a straight line, and you've done everything you possibly can, so maybe this is the time to call it done. Asystole. We can try some epinephrine if you are seeing this for the first time, but when you see this, make sure all the electrodes are properly connected, so you're not going to shock somebody whose electrodes are pulled and you're seeing a straight line because of the technical issues. Whenever you see a straight line, real straight line, always make sure those electrodes are properly secured and you're looking at an actual asystole. Okay, here's an example of a patient with left ventricular hypertrophy with a strain, And an important thing that I want to point out is that we have ST depression and T wave inversion, which is a part of the left ventricular hypertrophy. And along with that, we also see some ST elevation in anterior leads, which can range from 3 to 5 millimeters or greater. However, if this patient is just coming to your office for a routine checkup, you would not be concerned about this ST elevation. On the other hand, if the same person comes to the emergency room with chest pain and you see this electrocardiogram, the question is this patient having an acute anterior myocardial infarction, or is this part of the left ventricular hypertrophy? If you have a previous electrocardiogram, that's probably your best bet to compare these two electrocardiograms and see if there is any evidence for the same changes in the previous electrocardiogram. If you saw the same changes, then you don't need to rush and do an emergency cardiac catheterization. Whereas if these changes are new compared to the previous electrocardiogram, then this must be treated. What is your diagnosis? You should be able to tell the diagnosis right away. So we are dealing with the sinus rhythm with a delta wave, and this is WPW or Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. If this patient were to develop a tachycardia at a rate of 160, 170, 180, the drug of choice would be procainamide, which blocks the accessory pathway. If you use the conventional drugs like diltiazem IV or metoprolol or digoxin or verapamil, then you're going to block the AB node, increase the acceleration to the accessory pathway, so the conduction could go from like 2 to 1 to 1 to 1 conduction, which could be very harmful to the patient. So always keep in mind, if you are dealing with a patient with WPW who comes in with a tachycardia with a wide QRS complex, think of procainamide. Procainamide is one of the few drugs that reduces the conduction in the accessory pathway. What is your diagnosis and what are you going to do with this patient? Of course, we are dealing with an acute inferior myocardial infarction, and this patient needs to be treated like STEMI. The cath lab has to be activated. When we are dealing with a patient with an acute STEMI, we can institute the ACS protocol, which includes oxygen, morphine, statins, beta blockers, depending on the condition. And at the same time, go through their medication list. They are not on blood thinners, which may caution us about using blood thinners in the cath lab. All right, here are the things that are summarized, which I just talked to you about. What is your diagnosis? We are dealing with an acute anterior myocardial infarction with Q waves. That means this patient probably had this infarct for greater than 6 hours with persistent ST elevation and inverted T waves. This extends all the way from V1 to V6. So we are dealing with an extensive anterolateral myocardial infarction. If the patient is still having symptoms, chest pain, this must be treated as a STEMI, and the patient should be taken to the cardiac catheterization lab for emergency coronary intervention. All right, here's an example of a patient with a pacemaker rhythm. We see two spikes. We see a spike before the P waves. So we have a atrial lead activating the atria, producing the P waves. Then we have a ventricular activation producing the QRS complex. So this is an example of a AV sequential pacemaker. Sometimes we can see patients with ST elevation which may look like an acute anterior infarct. You got a hyperacute T waves, you got ST elevation, but we need to look at the underlying electrocardiographic changes. If you look at the QRS complex, we have a left bundle branch block with ST depression and T wave inversion in the anterolateral leads. When we have these changes, it is not uncommon to see ST elevation and tall T waves in the anterior leads. If this patient had this left bundle branch block the last month, 6 months ago and a year ago and who comes for routine checkup, you would not be concerned. On the other hand, if this person comes to the emergency room with chest pain and this is the only electrocardiogram you have, then the presence of this ST elevation and the presence of new left bundle branch block or an undiagnosed left bundle branch block should be considered as a STEMI and treated appropriately. Occasionally, we see some T wave changes. If we see symmetrically inverted T waves like this T wave all across the EKG, that is known as ventricular ischemia, and that can be a signal of left ventricular ischemia. However, if you see giant negative T waves, like deeply inverted, broad T waves, it may suggest cerebrovascular accident. So, ladies and gentlemen, there you got an entire array of electrocardiographic changes that we may come across in a patient during cardiac evaluation, and we need to learn all these things so that we will be most educated to deal with every possible situation. And while we are talking about situation, what is your diagnosis here? Well, we see a normal beat, normal beat, normal beat, normal beat. Then there's a little pause here. Then we see another normal beat. So this is an example of sinus arrhythmia. Yes, indeed, you need to pay attention to every little detail when we are looking at an electrocardiogram. Well, that concludes our presentation on ACLS EKG interpretation. To summarize, when you are looking at a rhythm strip or an electrocardiogram, you need a systematic approach to diagnose the underlying arrhythmia, underlying EKG changes, what they mean, and how you manage those conditions. Thank you so much for watching this presentation, and we have over 160 lectures in the field of cardiology. You're welcome to watch them, and please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will see you next time. I am Dr. Nick Nickum for Triple N Cardiology Lectures. Thank you so much for your attention.